Okay, we're going to, Mr. Constant? Oh, actually, we're not quite there yet. Just giving you a heads up. I'll call to this work Anchorage on proposed budget revisions and tax levies fiscal year 2022 first quarter. It is Friday, 2022. Let's go around and at the table here. We'll start with Cross.
Yes, thank you very much.
And you can just state your name for the record.
Hello, everybody. I'm Kevin Cross.
Thank you. Welcome. And continuing around the table,
John Weddleton.
Pete Peterson.
Meg Zalatel.
Forrest Dunbar.
Austin Quinn Davidson.
Christopher Constant.
And we also have Assembly Counsel Dean Gates. And then on the phone, Mr. Rivera, are you there?
Yes, Felix Rivera.
Thank you. Is there anyone else on the phone? Okay, then. Welcome, everyone. I want to note for items AR 2022-98, revising and appropriating funds for the 2022 general government operating budget for the municipality of Anchorage, and AR 2022-9, and appropriating funds for the 2022 municipal utilities, enterprise activities, operating and capital budgets for the municipality of Anchorage, AR 2022, setting the rates of tax levy, approving the amount of municipal property tax, and levying taxes for all service areas of the municipality of Anchorage general governments for 2022, and AO 2022-46, an ordinance setting the rate of tax levy, approving the amount of municipal property and levying taxes, will be on our regular meeting agenda of April 26 as items 14A, 14B, 14C, 14D. So thank you all for joining today. We are noticed from 1 to 3 p.m. and we will be taking up, I just want to make a brief comment concerning the approved municipal budget. And I want to thank the administration for the S version that approved budget as the starting point for changes for first quarter revisions. That was very helpful. Thank you very much. And I just wanted to briefly comment on implementation of the 20, because it came up last time. I wanted to note that in December, I met with Muni Legal, OMB, and representatives from the HR department, along with Ms. Zalatel was there. And we discussed some issues that the administration had with funds certifying the budget. And because of some of the changes in reporting structure and division classifications, there was concern that if the budget that, especially over December and over the holidays, and because of that, I mean, none of us wanted to see anything like that happen. We talked about a practical way to move forward, and the administration said the budget will be loaded and effective January 1, 2022, with the exception of several items which would be loaded first quarter, as the administration felt they could not fund certify those items. And the understanding was there would be no real world impact to that. And the expectation too was that those items that were part of the approved municipal budget would be loaded into it. So I wanted to make a comment on that, and also just, deal that was made. It doesn't work that way with the assembly. We need to vote on things, but there was an understanding of moving forward with the budget in a way that would have impacts, and none of us wanted to take the risk that there could be any impact to anyone's paycheck, especially over the holidays. So happy at some point to questions on that. Otherwise, I believe we can go ahead and turn to the packet of amendments. And I also want to note that documents are available online at muni.org. Click on Assembly at the top. There's a link to Assembly Worksessions. Scroll. So I'll turn to members Quinn Davidson and Dunbar if you want to kick us off.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll note, first of all, I want to say thank you to the administration for providing that S version and amendment off of that S version. So, there are certain increases or working off that S version. I will say I'm looking at our website right now. S version up documents, so I think that's something we should do that I see. So just for the public to know, we received an S version from the administration, which we asked for last week. That was passed in 2021. That is the 2022 municipal budget, as opposed to using the mayor's unilateral budget as the baseline. And so we appreciate OMB providing us with that S version. So the first two that.
Can I make a quick note
Yeah,
just
I'm
before
sorry.
we get started? Is that okay, Madam Chair?
Yes, and actually, Mr. Rivera, let me just confirm. Mr. Rivera, did you have a question?
Just wanted to be in the queue. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh.
I just wanted to be in the queue for when the presentation was done.
Understood. Thanks. And I want to note for the record too that Ms. Allard is excused. Go ahead, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
All I was going to add, thank you, Mr. Dunbar, is that the administration did that S version. Ms. Faraska, who's been really helpful in the last week, getting us information we need to do our jobs well. But they did propose in the S version eliminating most of the things that we overrode the mayor on last fall. So just the mayor forward to propose, but in the fall, we then provided some amendments to that, which is part of the process. He then vetoed those. We then overrode those. Now the administration is saying, okay, we'll show you what the approved budget was with the overrides, but also we're proposing removing most of them, as Ms. Faraska said the other day, again. So that's sort of the baseline of where we're starting from. And so any amendments that we're talking about now would be added to that S version that does remove a number of things from the approved budget.
Thank you.
Clear as mud.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really important and so the S version is not the 2022 approved budget, to be clear, but it uses that as a baseline and then has a number of reductions, as my colleague just said. So we propose two, we call them omnibus amendments, larger scale amendments that mostly just get us back to zero, get us back to the 2022 approved budget following the vetoes. And they interact with each other, much like our omnibus amendment did during the actual budget process in November and December, where we make change tax that impact the general government budget. So actually, if we could look at amendment. Oh no, that's right. So so amendment number 1 is the amendment to the alcohol tax, and so it does a number of things. Number of health positions the mayor put into the tax in the fall that were, we believe, legally inappropriate. They did not conform with the spirit of the alcohol tax or what we were allowed to fund. So in 2022, in the 2022 budget, we pulled those out of the alcohol tax and put them into general government. Now it appears the mayor has been did not do that. It appears that they have been using those alcohol tax funds to fund a number of positions in the health department on to budget. But regardless of whether or not the mayor did that, our amendment makes it clear and returns us to what we passed and overrode in 2021 in the 2022 budget, which is we put out of tax where they're inappropriate and put them back into general government. And that's about $1 million. So that frees up about $1 million of alcohol tax revenue. The mayor also, because the alcohol tax projections now are significantly larger than they were in 2020, even larger than Ms. Quinn Davidson and I advocated for at the time, there is additional revenue. The mayor has proposed putting about between $900,000 and $1 million of that towards called shelter operation But in conversations with Ms. Zolotel, who is the third sort of member that we've talked to about this, we don't believe that the overall homelessness plan is reliant on those particular revenues. They were not part of process so far as we know. And Mr. Weddleton, if you want to contradict us at some point, that's fine. But that is our belief. So this amendment maintains a portion of the mayor's asked for increase, but also reappropriates some of that increase back in the assembly our priorities. So it does in terms of things it funds, this amendment does four things. It restores funding that the mayor cut to child abuse, sexual assault, and domestic violence by $200,000. It restores the mobile crisis team back to the amount we passed for the 2022 budget. It restores the funding for crisis intervention training for Girdwood, and then there's still that chunk of funding. We believe we can take the mobile crisis team, mental health first responders, to something approaching 24 hours is the ultimate goal. That we can then have certain Medicaid funds going forward. So it both increases the effectiveness of the mobile crisis team, but it also, over the long term, should be maybe not revenue neutral, but it should bring in significantly more Medicaid funds. So that is what the First Amendment does. And Madam Chair, do you want me to pause there before we go to the Second Amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Yes, I've got two members in the queue. First is Mr. Rivera and then Ms. Zolotel. Mr. Rivera on amendment number 1.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess I did hear Mr. Dunbar operational costs in the health department budget. So I just want to get sort of a double confirmation if the Zolotel is comfortable giving the confirmation. If she is not, I understand that. I would like to then get a confirmation from Ms. Braska just to ensure that those funds have not been discussed as part of funding streams that we're looking for to help with the facilitated project.
Thank you for the question. So when I was an assembly member on the facilitate team, those funds just the facilitated process.
Thank you. Cheryl Fresca. That's by design. I'm just kidding. During my limited facilitated group, we have not talked about the operating funds for facilities going forward other than the federal funds. And so I would not say that we have included or excluded funds being available from the alcohol tax because we don't have funding streams sketched out for all pillars.
Thank you. I guess just a quick comment. Yeah, that was my understanding as well, just based off of looking at all of the different available funds. So I was just and would like to have further discussions before we vote on this amendment on Tuesday. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. And I believe Mr. Dunbar wanted to respond.
I just want to make it perfect. No funds for shelter or treatment. We are increasing them. We're just not increasing them by as much as the mayor is asking for. So there's no cut to the funds available. In all the facilitated process over the last 6 months should have been based on the mayor's projections, which are considerably lower, I would assume, in terms of alcohol tax revenues. So again, we are increasing the amount of funds dedicated to shelter. We're just not increasing them by, because we think mental health first responders, the MCT, is worth it to take it to 24/7. And actually, if it's okay with you, Madam Chair, I'd like to ask Ms. Zolotel to speak a little bit to the mobile crisis team and what it means to go to 24/7. I think she's our subject matter expert.
Mr. Dunbar, I do have Ms. Zolotel in the queue. And then Mr. Weddleton, did you want to respond back to the point that Mr. Rivera had raised, or separate? This issue. Okay, so I'll go to Ms. Zolotel, go to John Mr. Weddleton and then Ms. Zalatil.
Yeah, so first, where it's on, green is on. On this one, green's on. So where on this document is the money that would go to shelter? You know, look at the,
May I speak? It would be helpful, Desiree. I don't know if it's possible, but we don't have the S version in front of us.
I do.
So when looking at these amendments, it's hard to compare. So I think Desiree is going to get that. If you look at the mayor had proposed in his alcohol tax FY2022 Q1 an increase of about 900,000 to the line item for shelter. Already
the alcohol.
existed. Yes.
Wow. Yeah, I thought this had 98S. Is that what we're?
Should be, yeah. I mean, I can't see the paper, but so maybe 2/3 of the way down, there's a line item for 2.5 million. And thanks, Suzanne.
I don't see
And
that.
he increased 3 point something. So I'll try to find it for you. But what we said is, okay, we're not sure what those amounts are for. We asked around, no one seemed to know. So we said a little increase is fine. I'm sure there's a need, but wow, getting the mobile crisis team up 24/7 and actually going upstream and solving some of the problems we're dealing with is probably a better investment, particularly since it leads to reimbursement from Medicaid if you go to 24/7 service. You can't, if I understand correctly from Ms. Aldell, until you reach that 24/7 time period. But I'll keep looking for it, Mr. Wilton.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I have the right document, but I don't see that. So, and I would just say broadly on that topic, but some of those can't come online till things are rolling. So we will need some money, more out of the alcohol tax than we'd expect year after year. For the first, really a substantial, you know, we kind of thought of the divide it into third. It might be less than a third, something more than a third for homelessness, at least for 1 year while we get the system rolling. And then we start tapping into federal funds and so on. But right out the gate, we'd have some trouble. But it's definitely something we should watch for here.
Can I respond to that, Madam Chair?
Sure, go ahead.
I would say two things. One, it is already the case that bucket is by far the largest bucket in the alcohol tax. And two, we have a considerable chunk, even after reading through all your amendments, we have a considerable chunk of alcohol tax dollars that can be from last year that can be used for those kind of startup costs this year.
May I quickly just
Sure, go ahead.
Mr. Weddleton, I think it's on page 102 of the alcohol tax budget, and it is line 34. This must show what they're proposing, the difference versus the total. So that 950,000-ish is what we're referring to. Yeah. Thanks.
You would propose to decrease that some amount?
Yeah. So again, as Mr. Dunbar said, not decrease the amount that we've all agreed on for shelter, increase the 900 and some thousand increase, it'd be 200 and some increase. And then use the rest for the mobile crisis team to move to 24/7.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Quindale.
After that, the mobile crisis team is going to look real simple. So here we go. So line 2 there, that funding from the original assembly approved budget allows the mobile crisis team to be on 10 hours per day, 7 days per week. The increase of $872,000 allows us to go on 24/7 in quarters 3 and 4, starting July 1. So this is significant for a couple of reasons. One, the fire department through the mobile crisis team already jumped through all of the ready to bill Medicaid. In order to bill Medicaid on 24/7, the great news is that once you are 24/7, there's no waiting period. You can start to bill Medicaid right away. Additionally, if you Zoom about a 25% reimbursement rate for Medicaid, which is what our expert consultant had suggested, that reimbursement at about $611,000. So it's not a 1-for-1, but it's a significant opt. program moving forward. So, I've been a huge proponent of the mobile crisis team. This is really an exciting opportunity. There is also significant movement on crisis stabilization, the 23-hour recliners, and the short-term stabilization of up to 7 days coming online in our community, likely later this winter or early 2024. So investment would coincide very nicely with the additional stabilization that is likely to come online. I think it's a great public-private partnership. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Zell. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. I'm broadly supportive of both of these. Really getting the mobile crisis team set up has been a priority and will be one of the critical links in ensuring that the homeless management system, the system that we're setting up that is getting people housed, will be successful because we will have a rapid response team for people going into crisis. Kind of take 5 in the packet, which has another amendment that adds a position to what would be these 2 line items ultimately. And it is we're standing up a full team of people and it has limited administrative support. And this position would be a position that goes to ensure it has the back end EMS services to the services where they're needed. And so I've been in discussion with some folks about this, Ms. Alatel and I, and this kind of goes in partnership with these 2. And if we had an S1 or other to wrap that into those 2, as this expense is something that is essential to the program.
Mr. Constant? Mr. Dunbar?
Oh, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Are we ready to go on to amendment number 2?
Does anyone have any more questions concerning 1? Oh, did I see like 3 or 4 hands? I saw Mr. Weddleton, Mr. Peterson also? No. Okay, Mr. Weddleton. and
You
then
know, which one thing? Would you be okay with pulling out the Girdwood amendment parts and putting those as separate amendments?
John, you don't want to vote for the omnibus? Just kidding. Yeah,
I'm not sure I'll be there.
that's true. Good point. I still haven't accepted that. Okay. We could, I think, for France to speak to is we're going to, propose our ideas, hear from everyone, and then hopefully build a package that takes into account, what do we have left of the tax cap, where do we want to go, and build something that incorporates it all, just because it can be a little hectic on the floor trying to deal with all these and do the math. So my preference would be to keep it in there, but if there's a reason to keep it out or you don't want, then let us know, I guess.
I would say I do support them. In fact, I contacted Desiree and said, "Oh, I'd like to do this." She said, "I think they're covered." So I didn't put anything forward.
Oh.
So I do support them. I think they're obvious and
Yeah.
totally reasonable, but I think there'd be benefits to pull out the Girdwood ones and address them separately.
Okay. Maybe, yeah, you guys can figure that out. It's fine with me. I don't understand why, but you can.
Sure.
Certainly you can do anything. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. Anything further on Amendment 1? Ms. Alatel?
Thank you. To the sponsors, can you say if it's for alcohol tax funding that is over the projection from 2022, or if this is unspent alcohol tax funds that you propose to take these from?
So the majority of the funds we're talking about here are neither of those. They are because we moved the health positions. But the rest of it is the additional revenue, no unspent alcohol tax funds from 2021 in this amendment. And so there's still, I want to say, between $6 and $7 million of those funds have a different amendment, and I see some of you do.
Thank you, Ms. Alatel. Mr. Constant?
And the amendment that I mentioned before, we had identified for the projected increase, but the funding source is less important than the outcome. So whatever works.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. I believe we can go ahead and to Amendment number 2.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I start on this one, I want to sort of note at the bottom there, Even if we shift these funds in the general government, we'll still be $1.9 million under the cap. And I've looked through this packet, and a number of you have proposed things that are also under the cap for property taxes. Even with those, I still think we're $1 million under the cap. And so that goes to speaking about the mayor's proposed increase to the shelter dollars. If it emerges that you need those extra dollars, there is $1 million more under the cap that the mayor could access should he so choose. And the alcohol tax can only be spent on certain things, but these kind of funds, these government funds, can be spent on most anything, including the shelter, should we as a body determine that it needs to be done. Okay, so speaking about this amendment, so the first thing, of course, shifted those health positions out of the alcohol tax. They have to be accounted for here. Second, and again, this almost all just gets us back to zero. Cut $108,000 approximately out of the community grants program, which we had fully funded in the 2022 budget. We restore those funds. We also specify that $35,000 of that restoration goes specifically to the community, the arts grants, because that was the one that was cut from 100,000 to 65. Restore the portion of the Girdwood EMS contract, about 15,000 of that. We restore the development services, the inspectors that were let go, although it's a little bit unclear to us if they actually were let. But at any rate, those funds were cut out of the mayor's budget. And so we restored half a year of because there should have been funding in the 2022 budget for the previous number of months, but it appears that the mayor's office did not follow the 2022 budget and perhaps laid those folks off. And so if that's the case, then we just need to restore the fund for July going forward and hopefully hire those inspectors, the electrical and plumbing inspectors of the health department. And then finally, this budget, or this amendment, restores the SR program to the APD budget, municipal property tax funds, as opposed to shifting the costs onto the school district. We all received the communication from school district leadership today. It was communicated very strongly at the last joint meeting of the and the school board that they took that on because they had the mistaken belief that the assembly was opposed to funding them, have enough votes to override the mayor should he again cut the SRO program. I believe that we do have those votes. I think we do have a strong support for the SRO program here, and we should onto the school district. So that's what we do. But it even with these passing, we are still $1.9 million under the tax cap. And we did the math, but the mayor has said there'll be a 1.34 fall on the mill rate with his version of the budget. We still think this maintains about a 1.2 or even a little bit more than 1.2 fall in the because a significant portion of it is from the sort of school district side of the fence. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. We'll go to questions and comments. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question, and it may be that we need clarification prior to Tuesday night, is if we are going to add the additional health department decision. Oh, sorry. If we are going to add the health department positions into the general operating budget, what, if any, tax funds to date were spent on those positions, and if those could be paid back to the alcohol tax, because we would need to make accordingly, because if those positions weren't authorized to be in the alcohol tax, and I don't believe they were appropriately there within the designation of those funds or the dedication of those funds, we'll need to make sure balance, make sure everything ends up back where it's supposed to be, which would be the funds back to the alcohol tax, and it would have to come out of general government. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatil. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll say for Ms. Zalatil, I think that's a really good question to work with Cheryl on. We did ask that particular question here. Oh, never mind.
Sorry,
Good.
we don't have the amount because we don't know, but we gave direction to that.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. And I'll say also something I neglected to mention during the presentation of this amendment. Of course, this does not impact increase. So the proposed budget is about $10 million larger than the budget we proposed in that we passed in the fall, the 2022 budget. And that growth in the budget, I think, to mostly police and fire, also pools. We don't cut any of that. The mayor's planned increase in the budget, we, at least I agree with, and we don't have any amendments planning to cut it. And so this is all in addition to the mayor's increases.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Ms. Vraska?
Thank you. Point of clarification. So for the SROs, the funding is currently in ASD's budget. And so there are taxes to pay that, and now putting it into the municipality's budget and collect taxes to pay for it. So you're going to do an offsetting reduction in ASD's budget?
Could I respond to that?
Sure, go ahead, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thanks, Ms. Fresca. So last school board assembly joint meeting, the school board and superintendent indicated that because of their concern about SRO funding coming from the municipality, that was prompted by the mayor not included in his proposed budget, that they would, within their budget, cover that amount. So as you know, is then they're not spending it on teachers, or not spending it in the classroom, they're not spending it on things that schools need. And so our hope with this is if we are able to fund that 2.3 for SROs, not only are we funding policing and, in our community, I mean, students are residents too, we are also allowing them to put that money back into the class. There won't be set because we're basically just getting them back to where they were before this shift happened.
And could I add to that?
Sure. Go ahead.
In the message that they sent to us today, I believe they even sort of specify where those funds would go.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Weddleton?
I think those funds were also from their Ezra funds and not property tax. Someone here might remember better, but I don't remember what that ESSRA, I don't know what that stands for.
I think it's ESSER, which are their
ESSER.
ARPA funds.
Mhm.
That's what
Yeah,
they
it was there.
call
Yeah,
their ARPA funds,
right.
ESSER, I
Yeah.
think.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr.
I appreciate it. I don't know to what degree I'm allowed to participate, so I appreciate you allowing me to speak. But I think the end is that the officers are paid and that those funds are there. And so I'm wondering, is there a benefit other than freeing up money in the school district to allow them to put more money in the classrooms? Is there a benefit whether it's funded through this amendment or it's funded in the Anchorage School District? Because if we change it and then we them for those, then that does sound like a tax increase. It does sound like we're spending more money because they had money in their budget that they were allocating towards this. They're now not spending it. So we're going to cover that expense, and then they're going to put that, but that expense comes from us, right? So it comes from the community side as opposed to the district side. So although we keep saying we're not going over, isn't that effectively an increase? Am I not interpreting this correctly? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. I have Mr. Constant and Ms.
So thanks. There are two things that operate there. One is they cut the services they were intending to because they heard we were going to thing. So they were intending to fund other services with the money that was there. And then they were told, no, you're not getting that money. So they budgeted for it. The second part to that question, it does connect to this idea. It would allow money to go into classrooms, but the real functional situation is the state law restricts the amount we can provide to schools, right? There's an actual statutory limit. And so if the school district is paying $1 million for, just round numbers, police officers that are our staff, that's $1 million that we cannot provide to them for education because the state law restricts us. Whereas other school districts have higher maximums because the state's amount, the base student allocation, is based on Anchorage being the cheapest place to provide education, but it's not. In fact, Anchorage is nowhere near the wide, but nobody has the political will to correct the equation because that money is like a pie. It doesn't increase, it shifts. And so no one wants to take from somewhere else. So ultimately we are being able to any more than we can. We pay for our kids to be educated as much as we can. But this shift of cost from our police to their budget takes down the amount they can spend on education. So that's the net effect. And it was in their initial plan to have us pay for it because we have for the last 9 years. And so there was a shift of our expenses to them in the budget that was not adopted by this body and wasn't our plan.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. Alatel?
Madam Chair, I think the funding shifting around gets really confusing. Ultimately, this resets the conversation back to where we were prior to the 2022 budget. This is back how it's been. It's kind of maintaining the status quo. And as I've said before, you know, if there are any real desires to make any changes to the SRO program, it should be a deliberative, cooperative process between the assembly and the school board. And so I'm happy to see this go back to the status quo. And if that conversation should happen, then we'll learn about it. But in the meantime, this who should pay back and forth is confusing and creating a lot of uncertainty where none is really due, because we have the opportunity to just get back to where we were. And I hope we can do that and reset that conversation. It seems like it's been a huge distraction from really important issues that we need to address in our community.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Any other questions, comments on this amendment? I just want to call attention to the time. We're almost 40 minutes in and we're not very far into our packet. Mr. Constant?
Have a member of the school board to speak to us if we want. We have either Carl Jacobs or Margot Bellamy who could call in if it's warranted, but I don't know that it is.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Okay, seeing no other members in the queue, we'll go ahead and move on to Zalatel Amendment Number 1. Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a amendment from the alcohol tax from the 21 alcohol. I had the opportunity to work with APDEA to appropriate. It would appropriate $500,000 specifically to fund trainings that focus on the rollout of new equipment, case law updates, de-escalation, cultural awareness, wellness, and significant policies. So my understanding is there hasn't been the opportunity for much, if any, training in APD for quite a while. The amount allows 20 hours of in-service, and the amount is both to cover when officers aren't then on the actual training. And as with the alcohol tax, I believe in the language that we approved for the alcohol tax to come into receipts on how the expenditures of those funds were working. And
That was interesting.
and
Folks on the line
so,
could-
so this would require that report by October of 2022. So there could be consideration of whether or not we wanted to fund the additional deficit or continue this.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Any questions? Okay, Mr. Weddleton?
I don't know that this to large. My view on this is you give the police chief a bunch of money and say, go spend it as you prioritize it best. I mean, I know there's personnel and all this is broken out, but did Chief Curl say, yes, this is needed, I want to do this?
As I stated, I worked with APDEA and I believe they've been in leadership.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Seeing no one else in the queue, we will move on to Zalatel Amendment Number 2.
Here we go. This is also from the alcohol tax using 2021 unspent alcohol tax funds. Would appropriate $50,000 to the Assembly Department to do what we've done in other instances where we need to gather information, which is to fund a study to review emissions regarding personnel, staffing structure, national standards, and other overall cost contributors to the Anchorage Fire Department. As you know, every year we have considerable payroll concerns with Anchorage Fire Department, and talking with national firefighters, they've indicated there are a number of factors, including national safety standards, personnel, how staffing is stacked. I mean, it is a myriad of factors. And when you shift one, everything else kind of shifts. And so to get the opportunity to that, review the department structure, work both with IAFF and AFD to present some information to us, I think would put us in a better position to make decisions about a sustainable department budget in the future.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. I have 3 members in the queue. First, Mr. Dunbar, Mr. Rivera, and then Mr. Weddleton.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. So I see that this funding is going to the Assembly Department. That's sense to me intuitively because ultimately this is going to drive our policy choices. And so we're trying to gather the data for our policy choices. But I guess my question is, do we have the capacity? Have we done anything like this in the past?
Yes, and yes. So the mobile crisis team and our policies around the port were both with hired consultants from the Assembly Department. And much like with the mobile crisis team, I run points with whoever is engaged and the appropriate parties so that we can get this information season for 2023.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the spirit of this amendment. I just want to make sure, that these dollars are going towards something that will actually be helpful to the fire department. The department had a chance to weigh in on this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. I have not had a chance to yet be in contact with the fire department about this amendment, but I could do so before Tuesday.
Yeah, either you or just to the administration, if get an email or some other form of communication from Chief Shravi on this amendment, that would be great. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera.
Oh, I guess that was kind of my question too, is why did the Assembly? Because I know the department is do big analysis of their operations every 5 or 6 years. And does the AFD already do this?
Yeah, I don't know, but I would say the Assembly Department instead of the fire department, because it's a policy choice. And right now the policy choice made by the administration for the past couple of years has been rolling closure options.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Constant?
And just for note on the amendment, it should read the Assembly branch.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Seeing no other members in the queue, we will move on to Constant and Zalatel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Constant mostly spoke to this. I did want to indicate, while he was ambivalent about I am pretty specific that it should be alcohol increase projection for 2022 because this will be a key piece of the 24/7 operation moving forward. Hope would be that the projection will be sustained and it can continue as part of the operational budget for mobile crisis team.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel.
Disagree with the word she said.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Weddleton?
My understanding on the mobile crisis team through the fire department, I guess I should say snug control system so that if you have like 5 people doing something, you have a battalion of it, and that was the case CT, which seems like plenty of administration. Is that not what's going on here?
So once the mobile crisis team moves to 24/7, there's a new complexity of admin to help with that.
Yeah.
And as Mr. Peterson just whispered in my ear, it kind of pays for itself based on that rate.
Right. And there are a number of this is not paperwork administration, it's logistics support, getting materials and the materials available and being able to fill in on key back end positions. So at a certain level of staffing, you become more complex as an organization and you need administrative support.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Any other questions? Seeing no other members in the queue, we will move on to Zalatel Amendment number 1.
I will present this since Mr. Rivera is on the phone and see if he has anything to add. This is for the Anchorage Police Department out of the tax. This one I am not tied to which way it is funded, either through 2022 or 2021 unspent. It's to appropriate $50,000 to APD for specific recruiting efforts to increase the number of officers within APD, specifically focusing on recruiting individuals that are reflective of the overall demographic community. And again, like the previous amendment with alcohol tax, it would provide a report by October of 2022. As many know, APD has find officers that reflect our community, but has never been provided the resources to really dig into. And this would be an opportunity for them to at least get started and test those waters and come back to us and tell us what they might need to make that happen. And I think that that's something that this community has been asking for.
Thank you, Ms. Alatel. Mr. Rivera, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess I will just add, going off the last statement that the fellow from May was something the community has been asking for. I want to echo that members of our community wanting sports and the municipality in general to make sure that it looks like the community is served. But I think in particular, it's really important that we invest in our police officers and our first responders to make sure that they do look at our community. And I'm very thankful for the efforts that I know that Deputy Chief Kate has been working on to help make that happen. And hopefully this will just be a shot in the arm to increase Deputy Chief Kate's effectiveness and allow him to continue to do his efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Mr. Constant, and then Mr. Weddleton after that.
Thank you. I have been thinking similar, I was looking at one of the projects that I was thinking to fund it from, but I was thinking that we should fund it through the Office of Equity and Justice, that we have somebody who has a mission to do this work, and this could be a way for that person to support the police department way, and also help us to make sure that office is achieving our goals.
May I respond to that, Madam Chair? The complexities of APD recruitment, I think that's a great partnership, but I would really want to be able to build on the we have and then the equity lens over the top. And so I think it's a partnership, and I'd be happy to add that the partnership should occur, but really wanted to leave APD in the driver's seat because they know what their current officer makeup looks like.
So if I might, I think what I would suggest, you can add that language, it's fine. And then as we come up to ARPA, we contemplate a way to construct that partnership through resources.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Weddleton?
Thanks. So, I almost think my understanding is that they are doing this quite a bit. And we've had really bad recruiting for the last year when our academies have been coming up half what we need. The problem, they said that was a lot, but they couldn't get out. But I mean, if you go, you see, it is unusual for a police department to have a team dedicated to recruiting, but we do have one in Anchorage. And then the chief equity officer I know has been working with them. So I think that's done. You talked and he said,
I talked with APDA, who's been in touch with APD leadership about this. My understanding is that there's general recruitment efforts, but none specifically targeted towards this goal and purpose, nothing explicit.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. And it's well recognized that we have issues related to our recruitment processes, that our workforces are not mirroring our community. And we saw that in the out of the report that was submitted to us, the affirmative action report just a couple of months ago, a month and a half ago. And we recognize, I think, that we cannot do hiring that's based on any specific demographic, but there is no restriction. Additional enhanced recruitment efforts in communities that have historically not been included or been successfully brought into the system. And so there is to meet events identified in our affirmative action plan by doing more assertive and directed recruitment opportunities across the community with people whose jobs it is to focus on issues of equity and recruitment. So it that we tie these ideas together.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Any other questions, Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, I just want to say very briefly that this is something the military does. Particularly Field National in Alaska, it's very difficult to recruit from rural areas, but that takes additional funding. And so we have our general recruitment, absolutely, but I know that the recruiters also, and the sort of organization as a whole, different times during the last 10 years has really tried to focus on rural areas, and that takes, I think, this kind of focus and additional funding. So I'm supportive of it. I guess that's more debate for the floor, but just throwing that out there.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Any other questions? Seeing no one else in the queue, we will move on to the next amendment, Weddleton Amendment Number 1. Mr. Weddleton? Actually, thank you. Skipped ahead. We are on Kennedy Amendment Number 1. You want to speak to that, Mr. Constant?
Yep. I am strongly supportive of this idea of helping their board have more support. And so that's what provides staff support to the Chugach Eagle River Advisory Board. However, it has two potential funding sources, and the clerk's office is not an acceptable funding source.
Ms. Zalatel?
And I know Ms. Kennedy's not here, but maybe someone can refresh my memory from not our last meeting, but the meeting before where we passed the item with regard. Is this the same board or a different board? Because I believe the fund source for the board we passed the item on was the municipal manager's office.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Gates?
I'm sorry. Yes, I was just going to mention the same thing that Mr. Waddington just did. We had an amendment that changed the obligation to provide staff into the municipal manager's office for this advisory board.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Mr. Weddleton?
Well, that was the case. It went to the municipal manager's office, and I think she said, "Oh, and we don't need money to do it," which sounds impossible, but was said.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn.
Yeah, this is just because he's here. I guess for Mr. Cross, I think it would be great if on the night of, if you could let us know if they actually need this funding or not.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Well, the first significant vote you're going to be asked to take is to set the mill rate.
Out of all this budget, it's $16,000.
Yep.
Okay, so now we will move on to Weddleton Amendment Number 1.
This restores to Anchorage Economic Development Corporation the 50 that they've gotten for many years of support. That's like a quarter of their budget, and they really act as our business development brand. We gain their operation, plus they leverage a huge amount because they've got so many high level corporate people in their various boards and committees and so on. So it's really is great value, and I think that a clear example of that is our budget is always introduced with a report from AEDC. In October, we funded it all through the various utilities. Some would decrease the amount their MUSA and MISA payments and bumped us past the tax cap, so it got truncated down. So this just brings so some of it was.
Thank you, Mr.
And there's an
Weddleton.
error on it. First paragraph, line 2, it says commitment made in October 22 should be 2021. Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I had sort of two questions. really for the administration, but maybe John can also illuminate them. So I'm trying to understand that point you made before about, so we had funded it in 2022, but there was some issue there where the funds couldn't be found. Did that mean that we sort of paid the first part of the year? I guess I'm not sure how the grant is done to AEDC. So for the administration, did we pay the first part of the year and now we're the second half? And then second, I mean, frankly, I think the mayor indicated at the luncheon that he was supportive of AEDC. Why is the mayor co-signing this amendment? I guess is my question. Is this part of the mayor's proposed budget? And this is sort of an oversight that we are restoring it.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Ms. Frasca?
Well, the budget does include $14,000 for AEDC, as Mr. Weddleton has, $125,000 from the utilities is already in the budget for AEDC. So that's an indication of the mayor's support. As support an additional with him and find out he had not seen these amendments before.
So the funding request from AEDC to start with that the administration was working off of when they built this revised budget, I guess is my question.
If I could, just 54,000 for a number of years. So it came, the mayor's original budget had it at 0. I think you and Ms. Quindale are on an amendment to bring it back to 254 using, and we pulled it all from the various utilities. And the administration made, I think, a valid case that dominoes would have fallen into the operating budget. We would have gone over the tax cap, but they could do the 140,000. It was essentially down to 140,000. Or I say the mayor vetoed the 254, but he vetoed part of it. Okay, so he vetoed 114,000 of the 254,000. So AEDC is on track to get that 140,000, but that's not enough. Basically, they get 2 full-time positions out of the 114,000 that do a lot of critical things. I mean, he's really, shrunk his office, and this is a vital time to get things rolling. They've got a lot going, and we're moving back into and it's an incredible place to visit, and the airport's doing incredible stuff, and the AEDC works hand in hand with all these various developments.
Mr. Weddleton?
I'd welcome the mayor's support of this.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing no one else in the queue, we will move on to the next amendment. Weddleton Amendment number 2. To which I would like to add my name.
Yeah, thanks. Short-term rentals are a big issue throughout Anchorage, but particularly in Girdwood. The Girdwood Board of Supervisors, Imagine Girdwood, and other groups are really want to find out how many SROs there are, short-term rentals, there are in Girdwood, where they are, and we don't really have a good view of that. It's mostly anecdotal, but there is a company, Granicus, which has done some work for Treasury Department when they were trying to get more bed tax, but they just did kind of a point in time. They said, we're going to check at this moment. But Granicus, all the different places where people advertise their short-term rentals, some are really obvious, Airbnb and similar, and some are just, they'll look at Craigslist and places like that, and they'll track them and they'll map them and they'll just say, where are they? How long are they there for? What are they charging? And so on. So it's really useful information should we look at emulating short-term rentals. So it's a relatively small amount of money to really move that forward tremendously. And ultimately, I think Girdwood, which has such an extreme issue with this, would also be a good test case, as we do things there, or Girdwood Board of Supervisors devises routines, to consider what we might do in the Anchorage in general. Thanks.
Mr. Weddleton, Ms. Zalatel?
Thank you. Question for Mr. Weddleton. How is this information to be gained different than knowing the number of short-term rentals that are registered platforms and already paying bed tax? Do we think there's a significant delta? Is that the question we're trying to answer? And then to what extent would this possibly intersect with the identification of accessory dwelling units in Girdwood? Being that most short-term rentals often are accessory dwelling units.
I think the dynamic in Girdwood is very different because homes in Girdwood are from people who don't live there. So those are used for short-term rentals. ADUs are relatively sparse. So, I mean, I'm sure they are also. I don't know that we have a good count. The Treasury did that one time, I think it was 3 years ago, used Granicus to do a study, but things have really grown since then for short-term rentals. It's been really steady growth. So this would give a longer term who they are, where they are. And we only deal with, I think, through the Treasury for unknown online, short-term rental, Airbnb, I forget what the other ones are. But this Granicus looks at, Craigslist and next other sources. It's very comprehensive. I think sometime last year sat through a webinar that they had on it. It was pretty impressive. It is vastly more than what we do through their Treasury.
Okay, thanks.
And now it could be they match perfectly. We don't know is the point.
I mean, that would be the hope, but okay,
Good
thanks.
luck.
Thank you, Mr. Cross.
Mr. Weddleton, have you spoken to any community councils or anything? Is this an important attribute since 50% of you saying the Girdwood don't live there? Then is this beneficial? Does you have the community councils chimed in on this?
In Girdwood, the Girdwood Board of Supervisors has governing of Girdwood. And they, at this point, they and their land use committee act as a community council. And this request did come from them.
Okay, thank you.
And that's an elected, broadly elected board, Girdwood Board of Supervisors. It's kind of much more than a community council.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Okay, next, seeing no other members in the queue, we'll go to LaFrance and Constant Amendment number 1. This one's pretty straightforward. Mr. Constant, you want to speak to it?
Absolutely. This, and there are a couple of other items that follow that are related to the operations of the assembly branch. This, the task of running elections is challenging, and it's more than a time job when elections are happening, and much of the year it's a full-time job. And in fact, with special elections happening so frequently, it's almost, and the clerk's office cannot continue to be both the clerk and the elections official. And so this proposal funds I'm sorry, I'm on the best I have. This one, in fact, is for the special election for the downtown 12th seat, the North Anchorage 12th seat. So I'm sorry to distract. This, I think, is pretty much a duty we have to do.
Any questions? What was that, Mr. Weddleton?
Well, I mean, talked about charging the districts where recalls happen for, but we heard that was not legal nor just, and so I think the same principle probably applies.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Thank you, Mr. Weddle, for bringing.
Sorry.
Okay, we'll move on to, actually, Mr. Rivera, are you in the queue for the special election amendment?
Correct. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to continue that the school municipality should bear those costs. Thank you.
No, what?
Didn't catch that last part.
Responding to the recall. Say the whole
Ah,
We should.
That the school municipality should bear those costs. Thank you.
got it. Thank you, Mr. Yeah, we
Same,
heard
same.
fools on this
Same,
end.
same.
So, but thanks for the clarification. We'll move on to LaFrance and Constant Amendment number 2.
All right. So this one is a proposal of $94,000 to cover the increased costs of ensuring security of our meetings and also legal counsel contracts for separation of powers and other matters.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Weddleton?
So will we now have control of the security guards at meetings, USAC, here, where does this all apply?
So it's a more nuanced question than that. This doesn't get us there, but there are ongoing conversations about how we would get to the point that question resolved. But we are just having additional meetings all the time and having additional security guards that are present for our meetings. And so at this point, this just goes to defray the cost of the increases. We've had additional action center. And so current that we operate under Securitas, this just adds to our ability to fund those services that we need. And so there is a conversation that is not yet ripe about what to do. That contract is renewed, I believe, in August. And so but we're not there.
So at this point, we have in the assembly branch, a line item for security, secured. So we're paying for the guards at our meetings at the LUSAC and to some extent here as well, the City Hall.
Desiree has her hand up.
Go ahead, Desiree or Ms. Camacho.
Through the chair to a member. The securities contract is currently handled, I believe, through either facilities or maintenance and operations. And over the past couple of years, the legislative branch has additional guards to attend the assembly meetings because the contract, I believe, only specifies 3 meeting. So we have increased the guards, and since it was at our request, we are paying those expenses. We haven't had any funds for those security costs, and now we are trying to work that into our budget since it is a significant.
We reimburse another department for
No, the invoices get sent separately. So the administration gets invoices and the assembly gets invoices for extra guards, and we pay directly.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton.
Just good in the principle of accounting that we account for it in our budget instead of just, as it comes in and then catch up later.
And yes, the goal is to get to the point where it is clear that the assembly has authority over the security in. Thank you, Mr. Constant. Next is LaFrance and Constant Amendment number 3.
All right, let me go back in time. What I was previously discussing, this $109,000 increment, adding a staff position, an election administrator for the municipal elections. The election was the administration of and conduct of all regular and special elections of the municipality of Anchorage pursuant to the code. So this position is a recurring cost with $163,000 in May 2022. The issue, as I had previously stated, is that the clerk is just too divided. It is impossible to do clerk of the municipality and run all elections. And we will never find someone to do that job again if we don't have the key support for them to do this work, because this work requires an exacting focus.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. Zalatel, and then Mr. Weddleton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question for the sponsors, which is, this says to start May 2022. That's a week away. Are we thinking that we can move that quickly on this? I'm getting a nodded yes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel.
My understanding is we already have down there doing this. Is this already done?
She is in a deputy clerk position, and I don't know how that would shake out in terms of if she would want to move into this position. That remains to be seen. Mr.
That was just my question. I appreciate that, John. It was just for clarification of job roles. Thank you.
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think this is an important amendment because we have been asking an awful lot of the clerk's office over the last couple of years running elections. We've ended up with special elections. And the last thing that we burn to where we have to go try to find another clerk. So I think that this is a very good idea, and I'm going to be supporting it.
Speak to Mr. Cross's question. Okay, Mr. Rivera?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I had a similar question as to Mr. Cross. I just want to get a little bit of a better understanding of, I think just having some type of memo, perhaps from Ms. Jones, to outline what this position would do would be helpful. But sort of just gut reaction is how it's going to be structured. Thanks.
No. Can I go? Yeah. Okay, no problem. So I love how that suggestion really points to exactly why we need to do this. And is have the clerk write a memo about the details of why this position is necessary. So let's think what the clerk has to do between now and Tuesday night. She has to finalize the election. She has to finalize the certification of the election with the Elections Commission, prepare a final report for the election that occurred for the certification that we are going to take on for the Tuesday. And so now this is one more thing, and I'm sure somebody somewhere in the clerk's office can prepare a draft that the clerk can then kind of take outside of the duties that she has outside of the clerk to be an elections official. And that just, I think, gets to the point of where with this. We need an individual whose job it is to oversee elections, period, full stop, that it is their responsibility top to bottom and ours in the end, because the charter grants us that, to supervise them. But it shouldn't be a clerk, I don't think. And so I will see if we can get a memo, but I just love how that question really points the issue time.
Thank you, Mr. And Mr. Cross. Your question is obviously shared by other members, and we will get either a memo or answers in some form to that question, so there's better understanding. Mr. Rivera?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Constant, I guess the thing I would add is, anytime that as chair, I propose a new addition to the branch, I definitely wanted to make sure that there was a lot of clarity on the system as a whole and employee would be doing, how they would be adding to that system, not replicating, those kinds of things. So even something very brief would be helpful in helping us to understand this as we take a vote on Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Go ahead, Mr.
Yeah.
Constant.
I wasn't about you or anything. I just, and that is the perfect example because it's crisp and it's germane to this moment. And there are other projects she's working on. So I will make sure we something that you're not alone in requesting it.
And I'll just add that, we're in real-time assessment as well with activities wrapping up with this election. And as you all may recall, this year we had the observer liaison positions. And so we'll definitely provide more clarification. And to your point, Mr. Rivera, make it clear what this position, I think people will want to know how that went as well. Thank you. Okay, so we will move on to the next amendment. We have 45 minutes left. Brand amendment. Do you want me to do this? Right.
Yeah, right. Read it first. Right, so this adds a position for a records clerk. We have been struggling with keeping up with all of the documents that have been coming across our desk. One sec. So that have come across all the branches of government, frankly. And for that, we need additional support for staff to be able to process and dispose of the records in a timely and reasonable manner for the public.
Any questions? Mr. Weddleton?
What is, that's what Travis does, right?
No.
they're all overtaxed and they're all doing everything. And the clerk has identified this as a position that they need help in. If you look across our positions in the assembly branch, in particular the clerk's office, you'll note that there are 10 to 15% crew. So I guess I'm predicating, I didn't even look in the packet yet, but the idea is we're trying to get to a baseline level of functionality within the offices so that we don't get behind. We did have Travis doing minutes for months.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. And I just will note too, given the increase in records requests, we recognize as assembly leadership too, we want to be.
Madam Chair, so I to get to Mr. Weddleton's question, this position for some time, even when I was the chair, we had wanted to create this position because it's been necessary for years. So I think I appreciate Assembly leadership bringing this forward and look forward to supporting it.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Seeing no other members in the queue.
Thank you. So this amendment takes care of the disparity that we've identified in pay across the branches. For people doing equal work, we're not seeing equal pay. And that's just been historically the clerk. And these folks are all, I believe, executive and do not fall within the scales and tables of salary increases. So they don't get increases in the same manner that our other municipality get. They often get left behind because their increases have to be done through the budgeting process and not through an internal annual procedure. I guess I could state also increase the AERC director, auditor, 2 internal auditors, it looks like, and then various legislative branch positions would see corrections.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. And I will just add that this amendment isn't just about fairness, it's about best business practice and what we can do to retain talented employees in this competitive job market. We rely on trained staff and there's a cost to vacancy training. Seeing no, Mr. Dunbar?
It's a question. Am I wrong in believing the AERC director position is now unfilled? So there is an acting or an empty for a little while, and will that impact the sort of the amount we need for this year?
I do not know. Yeah. The question is there an AERC acting director?
Ms. Christensen looks like she's here.
Okay. Ms. Christensen.
Through the chair, there's an acting director currently.
No, that's just a different role.
Through the chair, Blair Christensen. There is currently an acting AERC director, yes.
And the second part of your question, Mr. Dunbar?
I guess 2-part. First of all, remind me who is the director now. Mitzi's gone. And then second, does that impact at all their need for this funding? Is their salary exactly commensurate or is it something different?
Through the chair. So it's Marie Husa, who's the acting director at the moment. And they're currently recruiting. And I believe there was some desire on the part to, Ms. LaFrance said, increase the salary to be able to attract a candidate.
Right. That makes sense.
That position, unless they have a staff attorney, has to be both the director and an attorney.
It's an extremely difficult position. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar, and thank you, Ms. Christensen. Any other, or actually, Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my amendment was actually to the administration, sort of tangential to this amendment. And I appreciate the responses bringing this forward. I think it addresses long-standing issues that exist in many other departments. Particularly, I know we've heard that this exists within the Department of Law. So has the administration looked at fixing those pay disparity issues within, as an example, the Department of Law or any other departments where this may?
Through the chair, Blair Christensen, Deputy Municipal Attorney. Mr. Burke is here, but I will say that we did submit first quarter budget revisions for the Department of Law to increase the attorney's salaries.
Thank you, Ms. Christensen. Mr. Rivera?
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. I don't have any questions at this moment. I think that sort of begs the follow-up of, did those get incorporated into the actual first quarter budget revision?
Ms. Frasca?
But if that's sensitive.
No, it's Cheryl Fresca. No, it's not sensitive. And yes, they are in the amendment package that you've already received.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Next, since you haven't been in the queue on this one.
Thank you. Can you tell me the total amount increase? I didn't see it in the S version, so it may have been, it was like.
Through the chair, on the AM support, page 2, line 66 for $60,928.
I know that under, this is great. This is probably a good start. I know under a previous municipal attorney, we had asked to start to look at a salary study because we do want to retain assembly council positions where there is experience, because the learning curve in municipal law is steep and varied. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel and Ms. Frasca and Ms. Christensen. Ms. Barr?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to sort of note, I've done a kind of running total of the clerk and assembly branch related amendments. It looks like it's about 519,000. I think that's, if somebody wants to correct my math. And the way that interacts with ours, we could just sort of showing how the amendments interact with each other.
Thank you,
Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Dunbar. Any other questions? Seeing, we'll move on to LaFrance. Chris, I'm going to hand you the gavel.
Ms. LaFrance, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. This amendment is for $360,000 to the fire department, and I have worked with IAFF to NFPA standards. And the idea here is to create 4 new permanent firefighter positions. The total cost for one additional firefighter is approximately $180,000 for one in July 2022. And again, this will get us closer to the National Fire Association standards in our community. Of course, is that this will make our community safer, and meeting the standards is important because there is no bias in them. They set the standard for all things fire, from alarm systems to sprinkler systems and vehicle specification for emergency response apparatus to PPE. And the MOA does follow the staffing recommendation is simply a funding issue. So hopefully we will all agree that to have a safer community, we need to meet the industry standard staffing levels. And for example, the national standards include 4 persons on a rig. There is about a projected need of 25 to 30 additional headcount. And then from my perspective, and I know Ms. Zalatel, you mentioned this earlier about the rolling closures, adding more staff. I mean, this is a start, would, if not eliminate, hopefully reduce that practice of rolling closures. I mean, I agree that there still needs to be a structural solution to some of these issues, and I think that this amendment is important. Thank you.
All right. Any questions I see?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to be added to this amendment. Thank you.
Anyone else? I'd be happy to put my name on it too. Thank you. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. That brings to Weddleton Amendment number 3. Mr. Weddleton?
Thanks. This should look familiar. We funded a media, excuse me, a media campaign with Win Rights Away. And that, I think was fairly effective in a number of ways. However, there was a recent court case, the one against Flying Crown, that the initial case with the judge ruled in favor, it was very puzzling, in favor of the railroad and their claims of exclusive use. The lawyer, I read it and it was very conclusion. This has been picked up by some national firms that fight for property rights, and they are game to try to appeal that. But a lot of that is due to the efforts of Winfluence this and get it out to those national firms where that kind of offer to have someone pick it up has come from. So this would just continue that effort. And this is something that, the catalyst for me was the issues in Ocean View and the Flying Crown, the landing strip there. But it is really a citywide issue. We had issue where is paying to use the right of way as if they own it. NSTAR and other utilities do the same. So this all adds to our costs. And it actually goes all the way up the railroad. And it is a very big issue. So this is just our contribution to their efforts. They have people, Whittier's pitched in, I think NSTAR and other companies have pitched in. Once we rein in the railroad can be significant. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. I would like to add this amendment. Mr.
Yeah, I think that you answered my question, John, in answering that the case was decided. I hadn't heard that. And so I will now go do my homework.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Any questions on this amendment? Okay, then I will go back to Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. I wanted to bring up two amendments that aren't in this package, but I think before I do, as I was looking for the municipal attorney, which is great, as I think Ms. Altel said, we'd spoken both with Becky Wint Pearson and with Kate Vogel when they were the municipal attorney about wage and how we could try to get there. So, you're welcome to come up, Patrick. All I was going to say was that I'm just really excited to see that. I think it will allow that the administration recognize that and put it in here. While I was looking at that, I noticed that the administration is proposing adding another position to the municipal manager's office. And so at least when I've been around, and it might have been different, deputy municipal manager, and we're adding another assistant. Can someone from the administration just describe to me what that position's for?
Sure. Thank you, through the chair. That is similar to your records in responding to Freedom of Information Act requests is primarily what this position will do.
Can you educate me a little bit on why that's in the muni manager's office? My understanding is departments do their records along with the help of
as well as the municipal attorney's office. So in terms of the workflow, we could get back to you about how things flow, unless Alexis, you want to. No. Okay. Yeah, we'd be glad to get back to you in terms of how they're processed. Sure.
Okay. Thanks, Cheryl. And then Ms. Frasca, two things that I think Desiree is aware of, but just we're too late to get in this packet. One thing that a couple of us have been discussing is that when we pass the tax and then the voters, we put it on the ballot, voters pass. One of a real small line item of $50,000 was initially on there and included in the 2021 budget to talk with the community about the alcohol tax, to be out there, making sure the community understood what we were spending the money on, getting true to what the initiative itself, the wording there. And so we haven't done that yet. And I think that given that we've had a full year under our belt, it's time to do that work with the community. And we'd be happy to partner with the mayor's office or her. The amendment will be $50,000 appropriation from 2021 unspent funds, which there are $6.7 million left from 2021 as it was the first year. And we're sort of getting up and running to do that work. And I was going to put it to the assembly. We could hire a contractor to do that work since the assembly has taken a big role and been here for the long haul on the alcohol tax. So that's one. And then the second one is that we received word, I think all assembly members did. Oh, should I pause if there are any questions about that?
Any questions on the first part?
John looks
Being thoughtful. I don't drink anymore, so I don't hang out at bars. But when I did, they used coasters. You could put all the information on a coaster. It'd be
Yeah,
kind
we
of
were
fun.
actually talking about that. I think a lot of restaurant owners have given feedback that, oh, it'd be great to be able to tell people who are supporting the cause what they're supporting, what things have been funded. We were from those conversations. It was Megan Forrest and I who were brainstorming that. I don't know if they want to be on that or not, but I guess you could speak up if you do, and maybe. Yeah, unclear. But yeah, have another beer. You care about, drink up.
I'm afraid that
Sorry, yeah, I'm glad Steve stepped out of the room.
fires aren't legal inside of bars. Fires aren't legal inside of bars, and those sound
Okay.
like Tinder to me.
Okay, sorry, I'm having too much fun, you guys. Who knew being on fun?
Thank
Kevin
you,
and
Ms.
others,
Davidson.
you're looking forward to a lot of fun. Okay, speaking of sexual assault, in all seriousness, Group Star typically has been funded, is my understanding, by the municipality to do and I can actually pull up the email and what type of work the executive director contacted me to say. So we funded, I believe in FY22, we funded Weddleton brought for Justice, $125,000 to fund them in their work, and also Awake. So during the pandemic, there was a definite increase in sexual assault and domestic violence that was pretty horrifying to see, and we knew that those organizations in a consistent stream of funding that has gone down over time that I think is federal, and Mr. Weddleton might remember more about that. So STAR wrote to us and said, hey, we're the organization in Anchorage that does, we're the predominant sexual assault prevention organization, and we really want to be able to do that work. Is there any, could be, know that there's $6.8 million remaining from the 2021 alcohol tax. I think it's a good idea to take $125,000, which is the same amount that Awake and AIJ got, and also appropriate that to STAR. What I think it's Miss Keely Johnson said would continue, or they would do with that money, and I'll just read it to you, is STAR has collaborated with the municipality over the course of the last 40 years to serve victims and survivors of sexual assault and abuse. We would use the funds for direct service personnel expenses, victim advocates and case managers, trauma therapy, contracted expenses, and any potential lease increases. She said, while we were not expecting a decrease in funding from state grants, this will be the fourth consecutive year of funding remaining the same with no increased cost of living. We are finding it challenging to retain staff and maintain our 24-hour response levels. So I would like Mr. and Ms. Eltel want to be part of that amendment. I think the work that they really do is important in the community, and we have the remaining funds from 2021. And also I'd like to apologize because sometimes I'm a little too free with my jokes and maybe it wasn't appropriate, but I do support the alcohol tax.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. So I've got 3 members in the queue. Ms. Alatel, are you still in the queue? Okay. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, I was just going to comment, the hiring of new staff person could do the work of 3 or 4 people. She was there for so long. So I think this is all about backfilling the loss.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you. Primarily in the queue to ask to be added to the STAR amendment, but I'll say also I think it's clearly within the acceptable expenses that were laid out in all tax, and the direct fund STAR I don't believe appropriate for an appropriate expense for the prior year's unspent alcohol tax funds. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. I would like to be added to that amendment as well. And then back to you, Ms. Alatel. So I wanted to be really clear that my APD were through and in consultation with APDEA. There is a email that just came in from the chief that says that they were not consulted, and that is true. I did work with APD, say that he was astonished when it was implied the APD had not conducted in-service training
In fact, they conduct service training consistently. It is to bring the in-service training up onto new and expanded topics. So I want to make sure I'm expanded topics, especially ones that were listed there, particularly around de-escalation and any, I think there was cultural awareness. So I think those are all really relevant things. So I just wanted to provide that clarification on those amendments and that quick response to the email from Chief Curl.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. And just a question, you mentioned new equipment, and that would include body cameras.
If and when that happens, yes.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Any other questions? Okay, I don't see any other members in the queue. I want to note again that I'm to the budget and the tax levy will be before the assembly at the regular meeting of April 26. AR 22-9 is item 14A. AR 2022-99 is item 14B. Or I'm sorry, those two were ARs. AR 2022-98 is 14A. AR 22-99 is 14B. AO 2022-45 is 14C. AO 2022-46 is 14D. Those are public hearing items, so it encourages members of the public to sign up for phone testimony or come in person or email the assembly. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just before we adjourn, I wanted to sort of ask my colleagues, during the last budget process, Ms. Quinn Davidson and I integrated a number of other folks' amendments. So I guess my question is, so Mr. Weddleton has indicated that he probably wants the Girdwood-related amendments, or at least this particular one, not integrated. What's that? Both. And so I guess I would just like to ask my colleagues, does anyone want theirs integrated or not? Does anyone want theirs integrated? If not, I mean, we can probably dispense with this packet in a pretty straightforward fashion on the night of. These are a little bit less complicated than our original budget process where there was revenue questions. All of these fit under the tax cap. So in that way, it's sort of more straightforward and perhaps less necessary to do our version of the omnibus. But I'll just ask, does anyone want theirs in the omnibus?
Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else want?
Does. I think, well, yours are, I don't think we're going to do the prior year alcohol tax funding. So I think yours probably are distinct in that regard.
Mr. Cross?
I did hear, thank you. I did hear back from Mrs. Kennedy. She says we can pull number one, that the code was changed and that is being funded through the clerk's office. So it's not necessary. Thank you. Municipal Manager's Office.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross.
Thank you for that quick response. And I would be happy to integrate it as well, though I recognize maybe there are some that might need additional information, and I don't know if you need to set those as separate, but I think it's very helpful tracking the funds and the dollars. Appreciate you all doing that. Okay, anyone else in the queue? Otherwise, thank you all for joining today, especially to Ms. Braska and Ms. Benzoff for being here. Appreciate your work. And again, for that next work session is at 3:10 here today. And what was that, Mr. Constant? Half an hour or so. I will see some of you back here then. We are adjourned.